on Law Weekly, we feature some of the reactions trailing the Senate's rejection of the confirmation of Ibrahim Magu as the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. We also have a chat with the Attorney General of Utah in the United States on the issue of effective public prosecution and the criminal justice system, plus our usual recap of some of the top trending legal stories in the news. That's the lineup. Hello and welcome. I am Shola Shuyeli. The Lagos Business School of the Pan-Atlantic University, in partnership with the Conference of Western Attorneys General CWAG, has organized a session on effective public prosecution and defense, ethics and essentials for success. The CWAG is a bipartisan group of the chief legal officers of 15 western states of the U.S. and 3 Pacific territories. Its primary function is to provide a forum for the legal officers to cultivate knowledge, cooperate on concerns, and coordinate actions which improve the quality of legal services. They also have international exchanges, one of which is this session, which was held at the Lagos Business School. It attracted judges and, of course, lawyers, the prosecutors, and the defense.
The objective of the prosecutor is to manage the process. It's a process.
Mr. Fola Othowori, a former director of public prosecution in Lagos State, shares with this group his perspective on the topic, effective and ethical practice, as DPP and Attorney General in Nigeria.
For me, an institutional weakness that has to be reversed if we are going to have effective and ethical prosecution is the Supreme Court decision in Abacha and the state, where they imposed on the prosecution an insurmountable burden of proving the case even before you lead evidence. That is it is only after Abacha and the state that accused persons began to challenge the process even before their plea was taken. That has undermined the criminal justice system across Nigeria. And the Supreme Court needs, and I've said it before some judges, that they need to reverse that position.
Beyond the institutional weaknesses, Mr. Othowori also dwelt on issues which often affect ethical and effective practice, especially the tensions that exist between the Attorney General of the state and that of the Federation and other agencies of the federal government.
We also have a problem where, although the Attorney General is the prosecutorial authority in the state because it's the state legislature that creates the crime or the offense, custody powers lie solely with the federal prisons. So you might be very ethical and moral and really determined to prosecute a case where the accused person is in custody. And so the judge sits, the judge of the state high court sits at 9 o'clock. The ethical prosecutor is there. The rather less ethical defense counsel, with all due respect to them, is there. and the court reporter, and everybody's there, the press, the public, and so on, and you sit at 9 and you wait. 9:30, 10, 10:30, 11. What's going on? Phone the prisons, the Black Maria. I don't know why they call it that, but the Black Maria, that's the custody vehicle. We just managed to get petrol. By then, everybody's exhausted. And then they finally bring him to court at about 12. So you've lost 3 hours. You're exhausted, you've lost focus, everything is messed up. That is a challenge for effectiveness. That's why I said it is a management problem. I cannot be an ethical person in an inefficient system. It just doesn't work unless I'm able to change that system.
The discussions were very interactive, and some of the participants gave suggestions for improvement.
I think that states should have the prosecution power and investigation power, rather. They already have prosecution power, but they need to have investigation power. That goes all the way to having a state police, state assembly being able to set up investigation agencies, etc. Other solutions could be considering separation of the position of Attorney General and that of Minister of Justice, and making, say, the position of Attorney General subject to election, so that he is directly responsible differently and separately from the governor or the president to the people. And I think it will make a lot of difference. The Attorney General shouldn't be somebody attending executive council meeting, as it were, part of the politics, and should have his allegiance to the people through an election process. And I think that that would then drive, so it will be clear who is in charge of the policy, prosecution policy. The person will be sufficiently empowered, and then the investigation agencies will work under that person. And I think, for instance, even the investigation agencies are subject to so much political influence, which an independent prosecution system would limit.
Now, my guest, the Attorney General of Utah, was also one of the facilitators at that event. I wanted to know how the U.S. had handled some of its public prosecutions. So I began by asking what similarities and differences exist between Nigeria and the U.S. and what he thinks Nigeria can learn from the U.S.
More similarities than differences. And so that gives us an advantage in working together because I think we understand the processes. Always there'll be some cultural differences and different challenges that way, but I think whether you're in Nigeria or the United States, we're often faced with the same types of problems and challenges. Underfunding, overworked. Too often there's a pressure between when you're bringing public corruption type cases, they're very influential people, so it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of integrity, and it takes a strong system that will allow those types of cases to resist the political pressure and go forward.
What have you identified as the shortcomings with the criminal justice system and public prosecutions in Nigeria? What do you think that we can do better going forward?
Well, first of all, we came to learn from Nigeria, and if there are observations that we can share, that's the purpose of this alliance partnership, to come together and collaborate. My own observations, I think it starts with the people themselves. They have to hold their public officials accountable, including the Attorney General. In my state, I'm an elected official, and I know that I answer to the people, and so I'm always conscious of that responsibility and that duty. Beyond that, though, I think it's an education process. Both people in office and the public have to put pressure and educate lawmakers so that they enact laws that are tough on bribery, that are tough on embezzlement, that are tough on public corruption, and create a disincentive for even powerful people to continue to break the law.
I know you said that you were elected, but in Nigeria we have a system where the Attorney General of the Federation or of the state is appointed by the president or the governor of the state. How much of a challenge do you think that this will pose?
That's actually our federal model. In the United States, the U.S. President appoints the Attorney General for the United States. In the individual states, the majority of the states are elected. Even where someone's appointed, they should be autonomous and independent, but it's much harder when that person can be beholden to the person appointing them. For instance, in my state, I'm elected, so I'm very independent from the governor or the legislature or even the Supreme Court. That's not to say that I don't try to cooperate with them, but I always have the last say. In an environment where someone's appointed, it can be harder to speak to power and to stand up and challenge the person who's appointed you, especially if the corruption allegations go to the person who's made the appointment. So I think Nigeria has a little more of a challenge, but I also know the people and the spirit of Nigeria. They're strong and they've got great integrity and they want to do the right thing. And I think that Nigeria can still overcome that challenge and be more aggressive in public corruption prosecutions.
December 10th was celebrated as World Human Rights Day. And so let's talk about one of the human rights issues, human trafficking, which is a global issue. How is the U.S. dealing with this issue?
Human trafficking is a global epidemic. There are 20 to 45 million or even more modern-day slaves. What are they enslaved for? For forced labor, for sex or sex exploitation, for organ harvesting, for conscription into militia, to become suicide bombers for strongmen or terrorists. And this is happening everywhere. There are people trafficked globally, trafficked out of the countries and trafficked into. So there are some that are brought into Nigeria, just like they're brought into the United States, and there are some that are taken from the United States, just like they're taken from Nigeria. Right now, Nigeria and Italy, there is a conduit, and an estimated 50 to 60,000 Nigerian women who are forced against their will to be sex trafficked in Italy. Just this year alone, they estimate there have been about 3,000 or 4,000 women, Nigerian women, who've been abducted at the centers in Italy where they're supposed to be establishing their residency. But this is happening all over. You also have vulnerable populations like children, orphans, kids on the street, those who've been displaced by either war or natural disasters or health issues like the HIV AIDS epidemic. I think I read some numbers that said as of 2015 or 16, 995,000 children, so almost 1 million Nigerian kids are left without parents. And people are trying to help them and take care of them, but that makes them very vulnerable to human traffickers who would come and sell them for illegal adoptions, who would sell them into forced labor. So Nigeria, just like the United States, has some challenges. The good news is Nigeria has organizations like NAPTIP. Nigeria has been very forward-thinking in passing laws and being aggressive, but like everywhere in the world, more people have to get educated about it. More laws have to be passed that are stronger to prosecute and to prosecute the bad people, the traffickers, and then protect the victims on the other side. More resources need to go into investigations and prosecutions. And then again, the victims have to get support. The rehabilitation is a long process. If you can imagine the cost in terms of the human suffering of little girls being raped and beaten and tortured and forced into sex, or being victims of subjects of pornography, little boys forced to work in all sorts of life-threatening situations. That is an issue that together our nations can address better, working cooperatively than just trying to do it alone.
One of the things that you've talked about is the laws. What laws do you think that Nigeria can tinker with or enact to deal with this issue of human trafficking?
In terms of the victims, victims were treated almost worse than the perpetrators. So women were assumed to be doing this willingly. Little kids could be prosecuted, or under Sharia law, for instance, which is popular in many regions of this country, little kids were punished for being involved in this sexual activity. Well, the little kids didn't choose that. The women didn't wake up and decide to become prostitutes. They were abducted, forced, and so the law shouldn't re-victimize them again. 90% of them will never even survive being liberated, because most of them die once they're in that life. But then if we miraculously can free them and liberate them, why should we be treating them worse than the Johns or the traffickers? And so laws need to be, and I think in many states in the US, we've made some strides towards protecting victims, giving them immunity, whether they testify or not, saying, we are going to assume that you didn't choose this life. We're going to give you a clean slate. We're going to give you the resources to help heal you physically, mentally, emotionally, and education, get you a job, help you start your life over again. And if there's a chance that maybe you're one of the very few who chose to be in prostitution, you might go back to it. That's okay. We're going to take our chances that the majority of the women are victims, the majority of children are victims, and they should be able to start healing and having a life again.